Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Lifestyle Medicine. Today we've got Larissa Conte. And Larissa, you are the owner of Wayfinding, correct?
That's correct.
Beautiful. First of all, so thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited for this conversation. I always love our conversations. I know this one's going to be rich as always.
Yeah, likewise. I was excited to get you on here because the first exposure to your work was at that retreat in Shasta. And that one evening, and I was very impressed with the efficacy of that, what it provides, I think, for something in the culture that's lacking pretty much. So, yeah. Larissa, why don't you give kind of a breakdown what Wayfinding does, what you're doing, and just the context of everything you're doing so people know what the hell your business is and what you're up to.
Sure. So, in Wayfinding, I focus on several different areas. There are a lot of them, but I can distill it down to doing individual leadership coaching, rites of passage, and systems transformation. So primarily work with urban professionals who have big hearts and bright minds and are excited to do the inner work to create outer transformation in their organizations and in their lives. So I call together different strands from my own life experience, including the personal energy and health front, relationships and intimacy, my career experience in organizational transformation, and then my work as a ceremony designer and rites of passage guide to help people understand how transformation on the inner level is what generates transformation on the external level. Because after so many years of working at other firms and creating culture plans or transformation efforts that are focusing on how we work together externally, realizing, oh, our egos are still there, our limiting beliefs are still there, our grief is still there, the ways we act small are still there. So if we're just adopting a new practice, but we still have that inner architecture, it's not true pivoting in how we're showing up.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot. No, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. There's just a lot there. So backpedaling just a little bit, when you said, there was a word you said, I think you said systems designer. So for the people that don't know what that means, can you clarify what that means? And then from there, I want to ask you some questions. But yeah, there was, that one in particular, I was thinking we might want to jump on that.
Sure. So I think in fractals and patterns and systems. I have an academic background as an environmental systems designer. I have training in permaculture design, which is living systems design that is generative of food and shelter materials and ecological biodiversity. As an athlete and also having healed from a near-fatal accident, spent a lot of time understanding the design of my own individual being, my physical, energetic, spiritual systems, and the patterns that I create in my own life. And then working with teams and organizations, those are complex living systems too.
Correct.
And I've seen that they all operate with the same principles of what creates aliveness and what inhibits aliveness, but the language and the mechanisms of intervention are slightly different in the different forums because the actors that we're working with, if I'm talking about like my spleen and my kidneys, that's different than the marketing department and the sales department.
For sure.
Is different than a forest and the riparian area. But they're all similar patterns at play.
Well, that definitely helps. So thank you for that. That gives that gives a context to that definition. So the piece that I think that struck me about your work that I think, at least for me, I think the work that you're talking about is incredibly relevant. And I think all the stuff that you mentioned, the grief work, the old operating systems we have inside, that if we move forward into new terrain in life, we need to update them. Essentially, we need to move what's happening inside of us. But a lot of times it seems like nowadays these concepts will kind of be, I don't want to say exclusive to like the new age airy fairy group, but it will kind of be removed from the business scene where this could be incredibly relevant, right? Where this could be real-time helpful for a lot of different people. And so with your work, that's what struck me. I was like, you've taken this thing, this emotional intelligence kind of thing that's usually in the alternative health medicine scene, and it's fully into the corporate scene, people in suits, people making tons of money. And not only are you having effect, it's shifting the dynamics in these places. So that's incredibly cool to me, because I think what I liked about what you were doing is, on some level, I'm always attempting with Chinese medicine to make it not as esoteric, because it can get pretty deep that way. And like, how do you distill it down to simple bites that the culture can actually grip onto without feeling alienated from it or completely disconnected from it? So when you tell me how you got into this a little bit, like how did you go from life experiences to, I'm going to plug into some corporate scenes and start helping people at the corporate level? Yeah. That's an interesting little bit I would like to know.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I lost the last couple words for you. So if you can repeat that one more time.
Oh, sure.
That'd be great.
Sure. We had our first little freeze on Skype, did we?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I had said, the last little thing I said was, how did you make that leap from life experience, these things that you've picked up in life, right? We all pick up skills and trades and different little things along the way, but how did you leap from that to, I'm going to jump into corporate or fall into corporate and start helping people at that level in that way?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to give you the medium version on this. So in my undergrad, I studied interdisciplinary environmental systems and science. And I became aware of how our beliefs about where humans are located in the living system really affect, and we are currently living in the consequences of those beliefs. So in Western culture, there was the emergence and unfolding of this belief that humans are separate from nature. So separate and better, or separate and worse, which was, the positioning in early environmentalism, like humans as a plague. But I became really curious around, what does connection look like? And at the same time that I had that curiosity, my dad died. So I was a senior in college and my dad died. And this will get to the corporate world and also weaves in grief. So I had this moment where I'm talking to my mom on the phone. My dad had been in a coma, and my mom and my uncle sitting together tell me that my dad is going to die sometime in the next 48 hours. And it happens to be on a Monday at lunchtime at the busiest place on Stanford campus. And I drop to the ground and I start wailing. And there are hundreds of human beings passing by me. And no one stops. No one comes over. And I look up, and I have this kind of out-of-body experience where there's the me who's face planted into the pavement, learning what wailing is in an embodied way in that moment, and knowing it is so different than crying, while I see the bodies swirl around me. And I look up, and I see a professor who I'd done a one-on-one directed reading with for 10 weeks. And she looks at me while I'm wailing and then keeps having her conversation. And I was simultaneously grieving and just shattered with this knowledge that our culture, and when I say all our culture, I mean modern American culture, has no idea how to deal with grief. And that realization continued to unfold in the months and years after my dad's death, and then as I navigated my own near-fatal accident and 8-year healing, and really recognizing the discomfort, the avoidance, the illiteracy, the emotional atrophying for people to be able to be with emotions like grief. And I chose to go into the corporate world because when I was bedridden after my own near-fatal accident, I had been deeply involved in the educational world, classroom education, outdoor education, experiential education. And I realized if we're gonna shift how we treat the world, that needs to involve those who hold the most power. And businesses hold a tremendous amount of power and impact, and they're also much more agile than nation states.
Yeah.
So I figured, okay, let's go into business. So I personally pivoted into business, and I started to see the beliefs that governed the functioning of these systems, and the ways that they were bringing out the creativity and aliveness, and the ways that they were inhibiting the creativity and aliveness of the people there. And I love working in the business world so much, and I'm so inspired by all of my clients and colleagues who just have huge hearts and want to create change through the business world, because as adults, we spend, the vast majority of our waking hours at work.
So true. Yep.
And so there's just these incredible living laboratories where we get to experience shifts and implement shifts that are also being asked for in society as we're pushing on the edges and seeing where can we go as a collective. So that's how I shifted into corporate, and that's also how grief ties in, because the separation between work and personal life has been massively blurring in the last decade, and in particular the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And in a time in history where we're all really being asked to witness the true extent of what is going on ecologically, what is going on socially, the injustices that exist across all scales, what we are choosing to do to our health, and how to be with that is something that is not often held. And we don't usually have permission. And so then we resort to distraction or denial or avoidance. But as you know, through Qigong and Chinese medicine, when we don't make space for those feelings, we start to have ramifications in our physical, emotional beings,
right,
and in our relationships. And at worst, we can start to have serious health problems. So
absolutely,
it's basically one big, fun, interconnected healing adventure.
To say the least. Good God. It's well, there's a couple things that come to mind that's really interesting as you're talking, because I'm of the mind that there are lots of different ways to the top of the mountain, and most of them aren't wrong. And
absolutely,
we can all get up there doing our thing, walking through life. But I find something really interesting about this work, because I think it, for one, like I said, I wanted to interview because it relates to my experience too. The big movement nowadays, right, with entrepreneurs, businesses, corporations, there's a big push for peak performance. There's a lot of the Tim Ferrisses, and it's amazing work. And I think another way to get to that high performance is a lot of times just processing the garbage that's already inside. It's almost like the emotional stuff that we carry acts as a stagnation or baggage in our system, in our emotional field. And then when we can actually pluck that out, there's this free coursing of energy. And I've had that experience with my friends. I've had that experience personally, where when I've actually allowed my grief to come through, and I don't contain it, I don't try to put any labels on it, I just go through it. It's amazing what happens after. There's just this, a surge of life force. That means everything from sex drive to mental acuity to exercise capacity, stamina, physically, emotionally, everything goes up. And I'm like, all I really did was deal with my shit a little bit, and maybe not even all of it, but there's this huge piece where, there's kind of an external push for, let's find the hottest supplement, or, whatever the thing is on the outside. And those things can help, I think, tremendously. Like they really can. But there's this other way that or if you were to blend these two things, like process the emotions and then, clean up the health. You're looking at then really these exponential leaps in performance. But I think it's fascinating that you're illustrating this because it's so incredibly important. And like you said, you know, a lot of Americans are illiterate in this, you know, emotionally unintelligent for the most part, or especially with these things that allow us to process the difficult trials and tribulations of life. So that really struck me when you, can we jump into that ceremony that we did in Shasta a little bit? So not recounting everyone's experiences, please. But for the people listening, Larissa, I was teaching at this event. Shout out to David Beaudry and his medical Qigong program. Larissa you guys are still in it? Are you out? Are you graduated? I don't know.
No, it was, it completed last year. So I was in last year's cohort.
Okay. So they're out now, but it was this program. How many months was it? Was it a year, 8 months?
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months with a break, right? So Larissa, I was teaching some Chinese medical information, and I was there for like a 3-hour lecture. Larissa was one of the attendees, and she's one of David's students. And you said that you're going to do this grief ceremony in the evening. You said, we're all going to do this grief ceremony. And I was intrigued because my relationship with grief, like you, I lost my dad young. I was 19 in college. Same thing, got a phone call. I was alone, thank God. But yeah, it was earth shattering. You know, it crushed me, and I lost my shit on the spot. And but when you brought up this ceremony, you said we're going to do this grief ceremony, and I was so intrigued. I thought, a ceremony around grief. I thought, what the hell is this going to look like, for one? And two, I was a little nervous. I thought, well, I've cried a lot about my dad and this stuff, but I kind of knew that was the thing that was going to come up. So from there, can you kind of give the people listening just the general framework of what that ceremony looked like how you set it up, and then we can kind of go back and forth with, you know, the shared experience. But I would like to hear how you explain it to people, because you probably have a better memory because you've done it so many times.
Yeah. So in that instance, and I'm largely going to call from my general framework that I take for these, because I might not be able to recall all the details.
Sure.
But we were a small group, and I was showing up as the facilitator in that moment, as opposed to a participant, as part of my contribution to the group experience. And we began by coming in and sitting in a circle, and I created a framing for the experience to talk about the value of grief, what it is to be with grief, also the opportunity that comes from honoring grief, because, and this is something I want to flag, is like, as it relates to sometimes the focus that can happen when we're oriented towards peak performance, this bias towards outer action and the devaluing of our internal, like, shadowy places, you know, that we can love and adore the life and able-bodiedness and creativity, but then have a really deep stigma of receptivity, of digestion, of processing, of the gold that lies in feeling the most challenging things within us. So created some framing, and then held the opening for within a certain approximate time container, the opportunity for each individual to share something that they wanted to release. How are you doing?
Good. I just drinking my drink and went down the wrong pipe, so I'm having to fix it as we go. But yeah, keep going.
Good. And that's okay. You know, I just wanted to check in.
Yeah, I'm not dying.
So I'm like,
definitely not dying.
Just rambling away over here.
Yeah, I'm dying, Larissa. I'm dying.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm good. Just the wrong pipe. Keep
going. Airway. So then creating the opportunity, because what often doesn't happen, and it's a simple, in so many ways, it's a simple formula, and there are particular agreements, because the consequences of not having effective cultural spaces for processing grief are that we often don't know how to be with our own grief or other people's grief. So one of the principles is to witness. We are not here to respond. I can have feelings about your grief, but I'm not
Right.
going to speak to your grief in this moment, because if we don't actually let each other grieve,
Right.
and if I start piggybacking on your grief and being like, oh, my dad died too, and like,
Right.
or like, I know someone whose dad died, and it's like, no, we have to give each aspect of our grieving its space to breathe.
Yeah.
That's one of the main tenets, which requires us as listeners, as friends, as supporters, to be in full witnessing and presence, which also requires us to potentially be with great discomfort.
Yes. Quite a bit of discomfort, and that was something I liked about this. I mean, I come from a martial arts background. Part of martial arts is eating bitter, right? Chinese culture is very much old school. Eat bitter, hold horse stance until you puke. And then maybe you'll learn something after 10 years of doing that. You know, there's a lot of that, and there's tremendous merit in that. But there's a certain amount with pain, I would say, and grief that I've realized the eating bitter, that sitting with the really uncomfortable stuff, yields this tremendous outlet of energy that comes through. But yes, witnessing it was very difficult. I mean, it always is when someone's in pain, which is just kind of a mind fuck to me, that even more so that you were breaking down in the center of the quad and right, everyone, no one's paying attention. It's that kind of thing. It's uncomfortable to the point where we don't touch it. It's so uncomfortable that I can't put my hands on it. I can't give anything to it because I'm just not equipped. You know, I'm not able to jump forward. And when people were going through their things, you know, I shared a thread with you because we both talked about, I can't remember if you shared, but I remember you telling me about it. And then but we both had the loss of a father. And then other people had completely different things. Sometimes they weren't about death. It was being, you know, not accepted in their family because of sexual orientation or some other thing. And I just thought, oh my God, I remember thinking there's so much pain that each of us go through and that we don't realize how much pain each person is actually carrying for various different things. And it was incredibly uncomfortable, but I was so inspired to see everybody go through their thing, cry in front of everybody else. Because I'm pretty sure there's no one that went through that without crying to some degree. Everyone had something that was, if people didn't break down crying, they cracked, you know, tears came up, voices quivered. And it was, but I thought, God, man, this is so good. For one, everyone was closer by the end. You know, I felt like everyone was a little closer, a little more compassionate of the group. And I think the exteriors of people that you see, you know, you think, oh, there's the big tough guy who's like breaking down and crying. You're like, God, it doesn't matter who they are, what they look like. They've got something there that hurts, you know, that's really difficult. So when you've done this, Larissa, that experience was amazing because I thought I can always cry for my dad. Like it was one of those things where I thought, you know, I have my yearly ritual that I do for him. That's every April 27th at 8:06 a.m. That's when he died. So I do it every year. I set up my whole station and I take about an hour. I play his song and I cry and I drink whiskey, his favorite whiskey. I have my thing, but I'm always looking for I so look forward to that ritual because it's my one time a year to check in and cry with him and to do my business with him. And then I thought, well, here's another opportunity. You know, here's another way to kind of get that reboost at a different time of year in a different context. And it was very much that way. So when you've done this with, when you take this process, how do you? I mean, I'm sure you explained it, but how do you bridge it into the corporate world? You know, for all intents and purposes, you know, we were at a retreat center. We were at a place that was like in the mountains. At least externally, that's a place where I think, okay, we're in nature, we're on a retreat, deals with mind-body connection. It's almost easier in a sense, but how do you bring this type of thing into the corporate boardroom, and does it look different, and do you reframe it? But is it, you know, talk about that process, like what's that look like in real time in a corporate building or a corporate, or do you take people out? What do you do?
Sure. The setting can vary and can be impactful, but you can, through the framing that I create, which is what guides people's consciousness and their awareness and the permission that we give each other, then setting in certain ways almost fades. because this is such a highly emotional and energetic experience. So as long as we create the field, and when I say field, I mean the emotional and energetic feeling that's shared enough amongst a group of people, then it's always up to someone's own volition and choosing to metaphorically or physically step into the center of the circle and share and be seen. Because one of the things that is true in a culture that doesn't value grief, sees grief as like, oh, like, I'm going to pity you.
Right.
I'm not going to touch this.
Right.
It's fundamentally related to as a shameful territory. And one of my wonderful, wise, grandfatherly figures who leads his own type of ceremony work with people gave me the distinction between guilt and shame that's really powerful and relates here. So to feel guilty is to feel bad about something that we've done, whereas to feel shame is to feel bad about who we are. And the imprisonment of the experience of shame is that we cannot change who we are. So if we equate who we are and how we feel as something that is bad, then all of a sudden we are trapped.
Yep.
And thank you so much for describing your ritual, your annual ritual with your dad. It's so sweet. Those moments matter so much. And also having these moments where we get to witness and be witnessed by community weaves relational ropes between each other, so that in these moments where we feel as though we are literally emotionally falling, we are caught by those around us. And that I've found it doesn't particularly matter in a certain frame the depth of relationship we have with those around us when engaging in a ritual like this. They could be someone who you just met that day, or someone who's a family member, or someone you've worked with for 20 years. It's just the opportunity to be seen. And so in corporate settings, I'll share the anecdote of in 2017, I was presenting at a conference about culture at work. It was called Life at Work, and it took place in Brooklyn, and there were about 300 attendees ranging from CEOs to heads of HR and other executive levels to consultants. And in 2 sessions of each about 75 people, I facilitated a grief ritual and talked about the importance of grieving in these times and what is the place of grief at work. Because right now, the short answer to that is none.
Yeah, totally. It's 100% none.
But
none at all.
yeah. It's just like, next question.
Right.
But that happened just a couple months after the white supremacy march in Charlottesville. And because what is deemed professional is starting to become a larger territory than traditionally defined in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, right. 80s, 90s at business schools,
right.
where leading edge organizations, where teal organizations, which is an evolutionary classification of organizational development, one of the core aspects, in addition to self-management, is wholeness at work. And so grief and our ability to be with our sadness must be part of our experience at work. And how do companies also choose, whether it's companies honestly or nonprofits or schools, choose to acknowledge what's happening in a social realm, choose to acknowledge what's happening in their own internal ecosystem. So that can happen through the case of, it doesn't always have to be around death.
Right.
But
right.
I have designed a grief ritual for a company that lost an employee in the ghost ship fire in Oakland.
Oh, wow.
So when you're like actually grieving the
Right.
death of one of your colleagues,
Man.
how do you be with that? Because otherwise it is energetically in every relational line of all members. And there's something that happens like vibrationally in an organization when it's not talked about.
Yeah.
It becomes much like it becomes in the body. It becomes this stuckness and this heaviness. And like in a river, when water has to flow around a boulder,
Right.
it's this large immovable object that is now redirecting flow.
Right.
That is a very similar analogy to the impact of grief in a system, that we have to go out of the way to avoid something. But then we're also missing an opportunity. So in corporate settings at that conference, I was like, whether you are processing a heartbreak or you're processing a change in your company culture because a merger and acquisition happened, and quite frankly, you liked the culture that you had, and you're afraid about what's to come.
Right. Fair enough.
Even though it might be an amazing possibility, we can't skip that step. As much as we'd like to, we can't skip the waves. We can't skip the releasing of our waters. And when we relate to them as shameful, then we hold them. But when we relate to them as holy, then we let them flow, and we realize these waters, when we release these waters, they nourish the seeds of future possibilities because we've created the space in our being and allow our hearts to break. Something incredible happens when we let our hearts break.
Absolutely. It's so huge.
That's how the heart gets bigger.
100%.
Yeah.
I could not agree more. Again, this is why I wanted you on here. I was like, we got to talk about this, Larissa. We got to dive into this.
Yeah. So I actually want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
In your grieving experience of your dad and of all the other griefs in your life, but that's one that we can focus on. How have you changed as a being through the process of grieving your father over the years, again and again? And how has your grief curve changed in that time, if at all?
It's an excellent question. And I would say I've thought about this maybe in a little bit of a different context, but it's a really good question. I would say how I've changed as a being, like me personally, how I've changed is that I would say my capacity to acknowledge gratitude. So I think for me, when I realized my dad had passed, I thought, okay, one of the instrumental biological forces that brought me into the world is now gone. All that's left is my mom. Like half the equation that brought me in is gone. So there's a certain amount of your mortality that comes into play very quickly. Like, okay, that could happen to me. I could have been in a car accident. There's a real check on life. So I think as a being, each year I've gotten a little more present with my life because I'm aware that life can, when I had that experience, I think it's just that ripple, even though the ripples are smaller as I've gotten older, it's still completely consistent. So I think I'm more present. I don't, I look at my business and I look at my, like, what I expect from my friends and what I expect from my social circles, where I'm like, get the fuck off your phone when we're hanging out. Even if you're in the back seat and we're riding in a car, get off your phone. There's a certain amount of presence that I expect from people. It doesn't always go well, but but I'm always wanting it, and I really feel like a lot of it had to do with my dad dying so young. There's a piece of it where it's like, show up here with me now, because this could be over. There's a certain amount of that. So I would say every year that has gotten more, and I can be distracted. Don't get me wrong. I'm not the Dalai Lama. I'm not like a perfect meditator, but I'm.
You're not?
Yeah, not yet, right? But I definitely, like, the presence piece is there every year, and I feel like I feel deeper, with each passing year. That ritual, when I do it, every year I'm amazed. The depth of the sorrow is always the same. It doesn't really go away. I just open the door. I'm like, it's always there. That's really nice to know that this wound is never something that I just get over. It's something I integrate. So that is a template and metaphor for a larger piece of my life, where I think the bad things that happen, it's nothing that I'm going to get over. I integrate it. And part of the integration is a continual metronome of a yearly cycle, right? There's a ritual, there's a rhythm to that comes in. And then to answer the second part of your question, you said, how has my grief curve changed, right? Was that the second piece? I would say that the grief curve, like I said, the pain is always there. But what I would say is, just like working a muscle, I am able to grieve and let go and not have it be I can drop into the grief state, fully dump everything I've got and cry my heart out and my eyes out, and just like talk to my dad out loud and just like, Dad, where the fuck are you? I wish I could talk to you about martial arts. I wish you could see my daughter, blah, blah, blah. Cry. And then as that hour wraps up, I'm like, so now what? Like, it's kind of like I'm able to, like, the muscle doesn't get as sore. You know, if like you haven't worked out in a long time and you work out, you're sore for 4 or 5 days. Now when I cry and I do my thing, it's like as soon as that door closes, I'm like, I feel good. And I'm like, the response is so much quicker now for me to bounce back. I'm more resilient. It's like a toned muscle. So that feels really good, because when rough things happen, I'm like, okay, I've learned this. If I can just be with this, cry about it, deal with it right now, even if it doesn't look so great to other people, I'm better for it. I'm faster. I'm a more adaptable organism as a result of allowing myself to hit the grief. This came up with just to flush this out with my daughter. My daughter was in the hospital for a month straight when she was about 6 months old to 7 months old. Our first Christmas was at Stanford Hospital.
Oh wow!
She's doing great now. She's doing amazing. Luckily, it was nothing, underlying, life-threatening, anything. But when she was in the hospital for that month, I remember, my wife and I were just losing it. There's nothing worse than having your baby in that kind of setting. And I had these periods where I would just break down, and I would just cry, and I would show it. And my mom, God love her, who's like emotionally intelligent, she's like, Gray, you have to keep it together for your wife. And I'm like, Mom, I am. I was like, but I'm going to allow myself these little interim breakdowns, because if I don't, it's way worse in the long run. So my mom was, and she was like, I get that, she was just saying, well, you have to be tough. And I agree. Like, I'm still kind of traditional with male roles. Like, men should be tough. There's a certain amount of that I like in men, that I like in my friends, of like disciplining your emotions and like putting things down for a minute, but eventually dealing with them. But, in that moment, I thought, God, if I don't deal with this grief, like this pain right now, and let it course, like I'm going to be snappier with my wife. I'm going to be, I'm going to be like way more defensive towards these doctors. I'm not going to be helpful in the larger context if I don't allow myself to feel it. But I think it's just the opposite for a lot of people. They're afraid to feel the pain and the grief and admit that they're in a lot of pain about something. And that if they do, they'll be seen as weak, and there's that shame and all this other stuff that you talked about. So it's a really good question, but it's helped me. I'm way better for it in the long run. Would you say you've seen the same type of thing or similar threads with the people that you talk to?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a second. Thank you so much for all of that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Beautiful. there are a couple things. So one thing I want to, a couple things I want to mirror for our wonderful listeners is, one of the amazing gifts of grief is the incredible value of presence and gratitude.
Yep.
Nothing eradicates entitlement like grief.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. That's very true.
I don't have to pay attention now. I'm going to have a million more of these moments. Are you?
Right.
So then who must we be if we don't take for granted the amount of time we get to have with each other, with life, with ourselves? Because when something becomes habitual or something becomes normalized, we can stop paying attention, and intimacy and like the richness of life is in presence.
Yeah.
And is in wonder and is in curiosity. And so a dear friend of mine, Gabe Wilson, shared with me this Zen quote that not knowing is most intimate.
Ooh, not knowing is most intimate.
Yes, and we can often grieve because we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what lies ahead, and we lost what was. And it's like, that's like the refreshing, like, rainfall on us. In so many ways, grief, this is another thing I often talk about in the beginning of grief ceremonies that I do. The ways in which grief is like water. Mm-hmm. When we dam a river, so ecologically, when we dam a river, rivers through their momentum carry silt and sediment and rocks and even boulders, depending on the velocity of the river. But when we stop a river, it loses its momentum, and then that sediment begins to fall out. And dams have finite lives because sedimentation grows and grows and grows until you've reached the top of the dam.
Right.
That is, and there's compaction from the weight of that sediment, and it becomes rock, and it becomes this even more hardened barrier in the river. That is precisely what is happening in our internal energetic being when there is a grief presence, a grief impulse, and we dam it.
Yes.
And what you were saying, and this is so interesting about the stories we tell about what it means to be a certain gender and have a relationship to grief.
Yeah.
And who's allowed to feel grief and who's
Right.
not allowed to feel grief, and what is strong and what is weak. And I cannot tell you how many times in my life people have told me I'm strong because I am sobbing in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I've found that one of the reasons that we're actually afraid to grieve is like we feel like we might die.
Yeah, it's a death. Yeah, it's a mini death that you're going through.
It's absolutely a mini death, and it's like something is dying. And this is a feeling I'm very habituated to through my rites of passage work. You know, I've been doing rites of passage for 13 years now, and the act of shedding is a releasing. It is a surrender, because we don't know what's going to come.
Yeah, you don't,
Again, it's like, oh God, I'm surrendering to the mystery.
Yeah, here we go again, right?
Culturally, we're more habituated to like, I know what I'm going to do. Like that, we are imprinted with the valuation of knowing, of initiative, of movement, of fixed form, you know, all these yang attributes. And again, it's like the teaching of the yin, because through the yin, so that dam, I've found where that dam exists, even though in Chinese medicine and medical qigong, learning that grief is the acquired nature, and sadness is the acquired nature of the lungs, and that grief can accumulate in the lungs, that where it really affects us is we dam the heart.
Yeah. Right. That's
the dam is not over the lungs. The dam becomes a shield over the heart.
Right.
And can I tell a quick story?
Yes. Because I want to bookmark this.
Yeah.
So as you go into your story, okay, and bookmark this. Just remember, I got to tell you the story about my grandpa. So but we'll bookmark grandpa.
Come back to grandpa.
Come back to grandpa. Awesome. You go with your story, because there's something very relevant that you have to share, and I think I do too.
Yeah. So last year I worked with a young couple, just like beautiful young couple. They had twins, 5-month-old twins, a boy and a girl. And in the middle of the night, the boy died suddenly.
Oh. Like the SIDS, right? Like
like
oh God.
And one of my very dear friends and clients was coworkers with the wife, and he referred them to me. And in working with this couple, one of the things, because I understand so much through having followed my own grief curve with my dad, which is very similar to yours,
Yep.
in when you said it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It's just like, how much of one's existence does it take up?
Yeah. Correct.
And then I was like, the door is going to be open for a long time. Basically,
Yeah.
I've found year one is just because it's the first of everything.
Right.
It's the first of the entire cycle. It's the first of all the landmarks that we orient around. That it's like every time, whether it's the birthday, an anniversary, a holiday, it's feeling the particular absence of that person in our life in that moment. And so I was like, but if you're conscious and you stay with it through time, it doesn't have to take you over and like harden you. If you're able to be present with that discomfort. And so I went through somatic exercises with them of locating where in their bodies their grief lived. Mm-hmm. And for the husband, his grief is in my heart. And I know old men who are hard-hearted. And I'm terrified of becoming that, because I've been lying awake at night seeing how easy it could be for me to become that.
Yeah.
And he's like, I have a partial shield forming, and it's not all the way there, but it scares me. And I was like, so then how do you give yourself permission to be with that and to be with your grief and also be with your love? Because when people are like, well, why doesn't the grief go away? It's because the grief is our reflection of how much we love.
Yeah.
That's how much you love your dad. That's how much I love my dad.
Absolutely.
This is how much I love the earth. This is how much I love other people. That their suffering or their loss or their pain moves me because I love them. And so in that way, it's an honoring, and it makes me bigger.
Yeah.
It makes me bigger.
There's a natural expansion that happens easily, I think, when we engage it this way.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if this is true for your grief rituals or if you've seen this type of thing, but when I work with my clients, a lot of times, and we're not just talking about grief, when we're talking about emotions, one of the things that I kind of pull from Chinese medicine, they look at the 5 elements as these non-self-aware personalities, which you've heard me talk about. And that thread of looking at your emotions like a personality, they are a personality, right? So anger is a personality, grief is a personality, joy is a personality. And when you personalize something and you make it, in a sense, just metaphorically, you make it an entity. Anything that is conscious and that is an entity, right, that is a being, is going to need attention at some point in its existence. So what I've seen with people I work with, and the way I think about my own grief, is I've treated my grief, I've realized over the years, as a personality. That grief is a personality that I embrace, and that I realize if I were to put any person, putting baby in the corner.
Yeah.
If you do that with your grief and you're like, I'm just going to put this personality in the corner and I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to talk to it. And every time I walk by it, I'm going to ignore it and just turn a blind eye. I thought, what is that going to turn into? What kind of person would that become? And I think that's one of the ways that I've started to understand why we have to look at these things, because they're a part of us, right? They come out of our personality. It's an extension of us. And I think it's really helped me, because I always think when grief comes in, are these really difficult experiences, really horrible things that come into my life that I don't like, even if they're small, even if they're large, I sort of run to it and I say, give me a hug, and this is going to suck and this is going to hurt, but I would rather give you attention right now and process these very difficult things now, or at least begin the process, right? I mean, it doesn't happen in one fell swoop. And the piece that I wanted to just is your story. Was that complete with that piece? Because I wanted to share the grandpa piece, but if you're not done, keep going.
Yeah. The only addition was that through the time of having space, even just over 4 weeks, like 4 1-hour sessions.
Oh, right.
To see the changes in both the husband and their wife, and they were like, wow, compared to all the other couples at our grief counseling group, like, we're doing great.
Wow.
Like, that does not mean this is easy or we like it at all, but we are doing, like, thank you. And that the husband was like, it's going away. And I know it doesn't have to be there. And
using that water, the river analogy, right? You moved. You're moving some of the boulders, so there's a free flow. It doesn't mean that the pain isn't there, but it's moving.
Right.
It's circulating. That's awesome that you work with them. God, rewarding work. Difficult and sad. Yeah, sad, of course, but really rewarding. The piece I wanted to mirror back to you was about my grandpa. So my dad died at 51, car accident, and he was 44 before his parents told him that they loved him. So he only got 6-7 years, give or take, of saying I love you. They cared for him in ways and encouraged him to do things and go to college and do this stuff. They grew up very poor, but he never heard it. Like, I love you, son. You're great. I love you. So my dad had told me this. I remember when he was. I remember when this happened. When I was younger and he was 44. My grandpa, who was a very closed off, emotional man. Very had just covered up his heart. You could just tell. To not tell your son that you love him. Is sort of a testament to that. Excuse me. And he had a heart attack, and and then he ended up having a stroke later. But the heart attack is what did it. And what I realized was, I remember he had a heart attack. He had to have open heart surgery. They cut him open, and I forget where I think he was in Oakland, maybe. This was so many years ago, I can't remember. But they cut him open, and as a kid, this is like one of the most visceral experiences I had, because when they cut him open, they came in and we saw him in the surgery room. He had this huge, gnarly, they had cracked his sternum. First of all, the smell that was not from the equipment, the smell that you could smell that had come out of his body was, I just remember thinking, like, whatever was inside of him was festering. You could tell that his tissues didn't smell right. Excuse me. Sorry. Ever since I swallowed wrong, it's been in my throat. So that smell stayed with me though, because it just smelled like, this is kind of gross, but it's a way you can paint a picture. So if like I floss routinely, but if you don't floss for days on end, there's a certain smell that plaque will get. And it was like that taken out by a factor of 25. It was just like, what the hell? Like, you could literally arterial plaque. And I remember going in there, I thought, oh my God, this smells terrible. And my grandpa was just crying. He saw my dad and he just started crying and he just broke down and he couldn't stop. And he was just a basket case. And my dad was like, what's wrong? And he's like, I love you, I love you. And I remember being like, and my dad, of course, started to cry. And then my dad told me, he's like, that's the first time he's told me that he loved me. And he's like, why now? And I said, Dad, I think his heart had filled up. Like, I think he gave out. And so the heart attack softened him tremendously. It also made him considerably weaker, right? His legs got very skinny. He had a lot less energy and he could not control. A man who never cried was a basket case from that point forward for the rest of his life. He couldn't, every time he'd see me or give me a hug, hello or goodbye, he would cry. And there was this huge makeup of lost time you could see. And the very thing that I think like men deep down fear that they'll become a basket case, even for a short period. I thought, here's a man who can't even control it now. Now the floodgates are open. The heart is damaged, energetically and physically. And he cannot contain this thing. And he would just cry and cry. And then he ended up having another heart attack and the same thing. It just got that much more emotionally open. And I thought, good God, this is so strange. But looking back on it now, especially in the context of Chinese medicine, given that they say the organs store emotions, I thought this is a testament to why we need to move our emotions. Why we have to circulate them, why we have to move them, why we have to deal with them. And this tied to the last piece, and then I want to go back to you, which was my first martial art instructor, Chuck Duran, who I really want to get on the podcast here at some point. But he, so when my dad died, touching on the grief piece, I found out in my dorm, midday, looked in the mirror, and the face I had when I found out was like someone I didn't know. I was like, who is this kid looking in the mirror? Cried, but then it shut off. It was just this immediate, I stopped. I went numb. And I was like, why am I not crying anymore? This is so weird. And I didn't cry for until the following Thursday when I eulogized him at his celebration of life. I cried that night for like 30 minutes. And then from that point forward, 19 to 21, I didn't cry at all. Zero. And at 21, I got into my first real, actual, long-term relationship. And I started to have, at 21, I was having sexual performance issues at 21, and I was fit, healthy. I went to a neurologist. I went to, I went to a urologist. I went to a hypnotist. I went to everybody, and the doctors were like, "You're fine." It's like they're like, "It's in this head, not that one." It's literally, and it's in your mind. There's something physically, you're fine. And so, but regardless, it was causing serious problems in my relationship, and I was super depressed, feeling just god awful about myself. And my instructor, who was a martial arts guy, and he was always talking about breath and energy. And at that time, I thought, breath and energy, whatever. I'm interested in the martial art piece, but I asked him. I said, "Can you help me?" And I said, "This is what I'm struggling with." And he said, "Yeah, I think I can." He treated me. And he basically found a spot in my hip. He did this thing where he kind of put his hand over my body. He found a spot in my left hip. And when he pressed down on it, I just got he didn't even push that hard. But I said, that is incredibly uncomfortable. And he's like, "What's it feel like?" And I said, "I don't know, but I don't like it. This is very uncomfortable." But it wasn't physical pain. It just made me uncomfortable. And he said, "Well, I'm not going to let go." And then he pushed in pretty hard. And then I just lost it. And I mean, like you said, wailing. Not crying. Wailing. He covered me up, turned the lights down. He let me cry there for about an hour plus. And I just, he went into his office. He left me in the dojo, cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And then he came out and he just very gently talked to me. And he said, "Look," he said, "I understand, you lost your dad." And this is the part that mirrored when you said that. He said, "You're not any less of a man for crying for your dad." He said, "You're more of one." He said, "Don't ever think that you can go through life and not let this pain in." He says, "You leave that untouched for 30, 40 years." He said, that's cancer. That can turn into some very bad things in your body. He said, "So don't do that." He said, there's a lot more fortitude and resiliency and bravery in confronting it. He's like, you're not unbreakable. No one gets out alive. We're all going to go. So be with that. Your dad's gone and you need to. So I spent the next how many months just crying and learning that. And that night, went back to my girlfriend, and for the first time in 6 months, everything was back to normal. And I remember thinking, holy shit, because I thought, we were both floored. Like, what? She's like, "Did you take a pill?" And I said, "No, I cried. I fucking cried." And I couldn't, and I would say that instance is what kind of got me on the alternative medicine thing, was that. That's what opened up the door. So all these threads, as you're talking about it, brings me back to this thing that you're talking about. It's so mind-boggling to me that you're doing this work. For one, it's so needed. You're doing it in the corporate setting, and you're seeing shifts in people. And if you can get this into that level of society, like you said, there's some real actual change here that's really important. People need it. Man, so much in there,
Yeah, there is
so much in there.
Yeah, I have many paths I could take from here, and I love how much I can feel my heart in this conversation, you know, and I can feel like the waters in me as we're talking about this.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of just, this is one thing that wants to come forward. So when we have, grief is one of my greatest teachers. And grief is not, for people listening, grief is not all I focus on in my work at all. It is one of the parts of the larger ecosystem of aliveness and power and connection and creative possibility that I focus on, and it is a necessary part.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned over the years is that when I have the impulse to push something away, as you're talking about, when there's that part inside that we're like, oh, I don't want to look at you.
Yep.
We are fragmenting ourselves when we do that. We are shaming ourselves and acting as though there's something inside of us that is an untouchable in like in the most stigmatized, shameful way.
Yep.
You are worthless.
Yeah.
Is the equated transmission that happens in that. But when instead we become curious about the value, and we become curious about, well, like, why do I want to shield from this? And then we hear like, oh, maybe because I've been told that people who live, like, are alive in a body that looks like mine aren't supposed to cry because it makes me less strong, and that I want to be strong so that I'm respected, but you'll only be respected if you don't, and I might be called a sissy if I'm crying.
Sure.
Then, and but that's actually creating some sort of poisoning in me, and then remembering being a young person and being stigmatized. And it helps us start to track. So I'm also a trained tracker, a wildlife tracker, and much more highly skilled in tracking human beings. I spend a lot of my time tracking humans. When we start to become curious, then we begin mapping the connective tissue in our systems and our beliefs that allow the flow or create obstruction for flow. And so instead of dreading and clenching and tightening and pushing away, if we can instead be with it. And one of the ways that I invite people is how to both be the riverbed and the river. How can you be the vessel that lets the movement pass through, and how can you also be the flow of it at the same time? Because there can be a fear that if I go into my grief, I'm going to get carried away.
That's it for most people, I think. That's the big terror.
And it's another one of that's this like water essence to grief. There is often I have found, just as a pattern, there's this subconscious belief that if I truly open up to the full magnitude of my grief, I'm going to drown.
Yep.
Which is, I will be submerged in water. And it's an amazing thing because I have not seen any recorded cases of someone dying from opening up to their feeling.
Right. Right.
And yet, we need to find these ways to feel steady so that we won't be swept away. And how do we create the practices? You know, it can be daunting if you have atrophied relationship to allowing your sadness, or if you haven't cried in a long time. How do you even give yourself permission to feel? And what are the spaces? And to begin to open, to begin to create space, to begin to share with people around yourself. And some of the indicators For me, I feel at this point in my life, I feel grief come in like a storm. I so relate to it like water. It's like I can almost see the clouds forming on the horizon,
Right.
like moving toward me. And depending on where I am in my life, I know I can't run from the storm.
Right.
I know it's possible to try, but like
You can give it a shot, right?
Be there. Yeah, exactly. And so, at this point, I'll just be like, okay. And the storm, when it arrives, I usually, when I start grieving for any reason, it just pulls on all of the threads of grief connected to my consciousness. Mm-hmm. How we treat each other, how I diminish myself, like the things that I've said that I regret, how we're treating the earth, how we subjugate each other, how we disempower each other, the use of hate, the use of force, the use of brutality, poisoning each other. It becomes a torrent. And it's like all of those droplets are simultaneously in my consciousness, and I just let them flow. And that happens to me now in my life on a pretty regular, it happens a couple times a year. And I don't create space in my life for personally for grief rituals anymore, because I'm like, it
just comes now.
It's like, it's not like I'm grieving, it's like the grief is doing me.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's similar to the arc of a storm cycle, where it's like raining and raining and raining and raining and drizzling, and then the clouds are gone.
Yeah. Slow
and
dispersion.
Yeah. And at the end of that, I usually feel like a wrung out sponge. And and when like the breath comes with that is a freshness and an exhaustion and a softness and an openness, which usually then creates, in not that long after that, this like flourishing in my life.
Yeah, it's the best. I mean,
it literally is the best. And so one of my advocacy points too is to look at the language of how we talk about grief and sadness.
Yeah.
All of our language around it is stigmatizing. Instead of celebrating it, instead of and that there's part of me that has now got to the point where I can enjoy a grief process for myself when I'm like deep in it. But I certainly have more habituated response at the end to be like, oh, I'm fully appreciative of it.
Yeah.
And know the importance of making space for it. But that we, to just look at the ways that we hem it in and say, it's like we talk about it as shit.
We do. Well, there's not a reverence or acknowledgement of the necessity of it either.
Totally.
It's not pushed that way at all. I mean, I don't.
For sure.
Collectively, I mean, there's good-hearted people out there who are doing amazing work like yourself, and there are some people that are hip to it. But like at a culture, the broad stroke level, it's not there. I mean, it's not. And I think this kind of brings me to the next question. I'm not a professional fighter. It's not my life path. I haven't gone into this, but I have studied fighting arts for a good portion of my life in some capacity. Mm-hmm. It's in there. Don't know why. It's just one of my agreements, this go around. But, so when I study this, right, and one of these things that I think is really relevant is there's a piece of, like men, right? Men, there's a whole thing about men, especially nowadays. There's a shift. There's things happening, right? Things are evolving and changing, but men don't cry, right? Like there's that old thing, and if they do, men are pussies, or they're wussies, or they're wimps, or whatever. And at the same time, part of that's bullshit. And I'm like, and at the same time, in warrior culture, that was relevant sometimes. If you're on the battlefield, you can't be going into a grief ritual because things are going to fall apart. There's a time when you have to open that door, when you have to close it so that you can be present, right? So you're not just a basket case at the wrong times. So, I mean, I think that's what was interesting to me about this too, is you sort of like you open the ritual and then you close it.
And then you close it.
And then you close it, because I think that's the piece that's the distinguishing thing right there, is that you open this doorway, you create a portal and a space for people to dump their stuff, to cry, to grieve, and then you close it back down and say, okay, now that ritual piece is complete for now. which means you allow to go through your life, because I think that's the piece. People, I think, open the door and then they don't even have a framework to understand that they can close it. Right? Like that it's an internal decision, like, okay, now I'm going to close it, but I've opened it for business for a little while and we close it down. And I think that's a big piece, because I think sometimes there does need to be a set and setting, it seems like, for that space for people to get into it and to feel safe, but then to close it back down, because if that's not there, I think that's part of the fear too, right? Is that they're not even aware of the opening and closing mechanism. If it's if it's not there, they think it's just open. And it's always open, and I'm never going to be able to stop. So it's different. Like I said, I think that's relevant in martial culture, right? In feudal times when people were fighting, it's like you're going to see some pretty horrific things on a battlefield. You're going to see people dismembered and blood and horrible, horrible things. And you probably can't process it right then and there. You're going to have to wait and open that door later. And I'm guessing a lot of those guys probably didn't. Maybe some did, and I mean... So what are your thoughts on that, like in terms of giving context to that, like the opening and closing piece for sort of settling people's minds about this process? Yeah.
Well, I think it's also an interesting thing, because I just came out this past weekend. I did my wilderness first responder recertification, and emergency medicine culture is another subculture that is exposed to a lot of traumatic events.
Yep.
And must have clarity and efficacy of movement and decision making and action, but oftentimes can also tend away from being able to simultaneously hold compassion. If we think also of our medical professionals in not in wilderness settings, in our hospitals. If we think of our ambulance staffers, if there are just so many places. Also, if you're oftentimes like in executive settings, making choices because there's a velocity of an organization moving.
Right.
But if in those places we do not make space, or if you're a hospice worker, or if you're a caretaker, if we don't, or if you're a social worker, and if you're working with children in the like juvenile system or the foster care system, or if you're an activist, a social justice activist or an environmental activist, you are squarely facing pain.
Yep. All the time.
Yeah, all the time. And that unless we create conscious openings and closings of the valves to really let it go, then you get that emotional plaque buildup. And then all of a sudden you're objectifying individuals. And it's like, it's just another body. You're just another case. It's just another fight, and then like, ooh, uh-oh.
Whoa, you just opened up a whole thing in my psyche when you were saying that. I think about this, and I can say this less so with women. I mean, I have lots of female friends who I love to death, but I'm just saying in my male friendships throughout my life, I've seen that to be very true. I would say guys that I know, friends of mine who have, let's just say, emotional baggage about their parents, about maybe not feeling loved or not being cared for enough appropriately or whatever their thing is. And then how that relates to sexual connection with women, where there's sort of a distant, I mean, no judgment, right? Casual sex is casual sex. People can do whatever they want, but there comes a point where it's just a perpetual pattern where it's just every connection they have is just sort of another sexual connection with a woman that doesn't have necessarily a lot of depth. There's not a lot of potential for even love. It's just going through the motions of the physical act with very little understanding or depth about the other person. There's just kind of a superficial, like, I'm getting laid, and that's about where it begins and ends, and it's fun. It's great. Oh, that was exciting. And then there's just kind of this lull. It's like they're on autopilot almost, where it's like, how many partners do you have to go through before you actually start attempting to dive in. Like, I'm like, is every single one just, they can't all be, off or wrong or not for you. I'm like, so what, where's the disconnect? But you start to see this, right? It's like that same thing. It's just another person. It's just another body. It's just another.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've experienced that in the medical context.
Yeah.
Doctors bullying, patients, where they're just like, you do this procedure because it's, it's just, ugh. And it's like, whoa, slow down.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You have no idea what these parents have been through prior to this. You
Right.
have nothing about them. And
Yeah.
and there's that piece that I think we all have to be really careful of because, well, and that's the opposite. It seems like that, if you process your grief or you process your emotions, there is this sensitivity and aliveness and robust energy that comes from the processing of it. And if you don't do it, it's just the opposite. It seems like you start to become calloused and numb and just shut down. I mean, I've heard those. I've seen those interviews with the factory farming slaughterhouse workers. They said they were just mortified for the first few months of their work, and they said, but if you want to keep your paycheck and keep a job, you just have to shut down. You just got to shut down and just do that and not think that it's awful. Like they have to, you got to compartmentalize the emotions. And then it's just the opposite, right?
Yeah. And then there are consequences.
Yeah. There's going to be real consequences inside and out, right?
Totally. So there are a bunch of threads that I'm going to go with. One, I love that you're bringing up, twice now there's been the connection made between grief and sexual energy in our sexual life. Yeah. And as you and I have talked in other circumstances, part of my training and passion and part of my offerings are around sex, relationship, and intimacy coaching. And that there is a very real connection between grief and intimacy in our ecosystem. So part of what you're describing, if we, want to locate this in the body, so if there's the association between our kidneys, our water element, our sexual energy, our jing, it's amazing to me that we can endeavor to be highly creative, highly alive beings and not consciously tend and cultivate our sexual energy. And that none of our centers or energies can, in my hypothesis, none of these energies can be in their full expression if they exist in isolation from all the other elements in our internal ecosystem.
Yeah, agreed.
So that we cannot experience great creative expression if it's divorced from our sexual aliveness. We cannot experience great bigness of heart and passion if we don't allow ourselves to grieve. These things can't thrive if we don't have clear boundaries in our life, or if we don't honor the brightness of our yes. If we don't know what is nourishing. And the dynamics you were describing, particularly around, and this also relates to a theme that's been coming up, is around men and grief. Yeah. Because we have great permission in this culture for female-bodied individuals to grieve. So if you look at the patterning on playgrounds, when a little girl falls over, oftentimes the messaging she can receive is, what happened? Are you okay? And there's permission to feel, to have the feeling arc. And then it's like, okay, and, go on. And I'm just going to speak in gender binaries also in this moment. Yeah. Recognizing that there is much greater complexity to the gender spectrum. And that our culture is just beginning to understand the incredible traps we have around the stories we tell around the bodies we're in. And what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do based on the gender we identify with and the bodies we're born into, which are also two different things. So that said, going back to what is culturally allowed. So a little boy on the playground, you fall over, like, get up, champ, like, you can tough through it. And there is value, I think, for all human beings to have an active permission with their emotions, and then also to develop the skills to know what does it look like when there's like overindulgence of an emotion?
Yeah.
When does it become a tidal wave?
Right.
And where is this like middle path between getting swept away in a tidal wave and like not really having any rooted or boundaried relationship to our emotions and really letting our emotions have us? And at the other end of an extreme spectrum, what happens when we don't allow them at all? And so instead, to cultivate really a more conscious relationship with our emotions, and then the way that can translate into our sexual lives is there's a ton of permission for women to inhabit their hearts.
Yeah.
And a ton of stigma for women to inhabit their sexual energy.
It's very true.
And then it's a binary flip. Mm-hmm. Where there's a ton of permission and encouragement and pressure for men to inhabit their sexual energy, and a ton of stigma and shaming for men to inhabit their hearts in certain ways.
Right.
And all of us, regardless of the bodies we're in, what does it look like when we get to be fully integrated beings? What does it look like when we don't shame any part? And that oftentimes I find some of the like energetic constellation and kind of style around the peak performance. I think the peak performance like culture, and I'm very interested in a lot of aspects of peak performance.
Yeah,
the
me
peak
too.
Performance culture, and also like the executive, high performing like executive culture can both appeal to these super young, brain oriented individuals whereas the commonality of just profound shaming of the yin.
Yep.
And where it's like, you don't want to rest, you don't want to take care of yourself, you're not valued for your emotions, like grieving is weak, taking time off, it means you're lazy, you don't want to be sensual, you don't want to be artistic, and it's just like, it's just a continued
it's a shit show. It's a total shit show. Yeah.
Right. And so then it's like, oh, well, then we're just going to see the same patterns happen, because what we resist is actually often our greatest teacher.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, well, guess what? Look, there's a teacher. And so it's like, do we want to try and burn the boulder? Do we want to try and hammer the boulder into bits? Do we want to put the boulder in a cage? And it's like, there is still there, not going anywhere. And
absolutely.
Actually, and so one of the things that I have said before in my work is that which we desire most deeply and that which we fear most deeply are the signposts to our becoming.
Ooh, I like that. Accurate too.
Yeah.
Right. The stuff we don't want to look at. Right.
Right.
The stuff that we're like, no.
It's like, no. Those are literally
the doorways.
The neon arrows pointing to the gold mine.
Yeah. No, well said.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because I'm curious about this. You know, I've had, so some people I've seen, various friends throughout my life. You know, I don't have any siblings, so I was blessed, you know, karmically with just a lot of amazing friends. Like I have a lot of amazing friends. I make friends very easily, but yeah, yes I do. But then I'm able to keep people. You know, that when I get them. You know, when I have an emotional resonance with them or a humor resonance, I can just I'm like, yep, I got you. We're together. We're going to be hanging out for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
But I've seen, you know, through the spectrum of my friendships, I've seen a lot of guys who, you know, kind of like what we're saying. They go through a depressed stage, right? Yeah. There's a lot of unresolved grief in their life about something, right? Parenting, childhood, environment, whatever. They have their grief, and then they'll go through these bouts of very real depression and sadness where they're crying and they're sad and they're whatever. And they don't really bounce back. So for you and I, like we're talking about that thing, and maybe because we were like, hit on the jaw early on, and you're like, wow, like, okay, I was hit hard, therefore I know I got hit, and I kind of had to deal with it differently. But it's like for some of my friends, when I've seen them, they will go through these periods of depression, sometimes for weeks on end, and they sort of slowly come out of the stupor. But when they come out of the stupor, there isn't that resilient bounce back. They've just they're back to status quo, right? There's like a low, but there isn't like a peak or a spike back up. That aliveness, there isn't that where they get to and then come back down to an equilibrium. And I'm wondering, have you seen that type of thing in people? And if that's happening, what's missing in the grief dynamic or process for them to not feel that? Because for me, that's the trade-off. That's sort of the light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of my ritual for my dad. Part of why I don't want to miss it is for how amazing I feel the day after. Yeah. I'm like, oh, finally I got to hit the reset button again. Like, that's my reset. So if that wasn't there, that prospect would be considerably more. Yeah. It'd be very different. I'm not sure I would feel the same way. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, it brings up so much around the concept of alchemy. Because if we exist in an orientation where we believe certain things are good and certain things are bad, and then we experience something that's bad, and then it's hard, and then we're in a survival to get through it, or we're at a place that it's really no longer avoidable because it's gone from a whisper to a scream to an air gun to a 24-hour siren that's blaring in our face and really preventing the flow of our life. Then it's okay, now I can't. Yeah. Now, I have to take you off the avoidance shelf. Right. Because I thought I could get away with avoiding you before, and now, I can't. I feel like when, and I also want to share that, my healing process from my near fatal accident was long, so long, in the 7-8 year window. Yeah. And when I share my story with people, I usually get I get pity or revulsion or just this relief of oh my God, thank God I haven't had to do that. Right. And that there were long periods of time where I just wanted to be saved. Where it was something this is, right. I think I don't know if I can take any more of this. I wanted to be saved from my life and from my existence and from my pain. And we are constantly shown that story, and that's highlighted in all of the popular media and storytelling we receive about going through challenge. Yeah. In a lot of, and this is a broad generalization, and so sure. Critical thinking listeners, I'm with you that's not all that we're told, but we can often receive that patterning. Right. And so so to make this personal, so in my experience, I really started to have to look at my inner victim, which is one of the forms that my ego can take, because engaging our grief, going into the underworld of our beings, it's a doorway to look at all the parts we don't like. Yeah. And so it creates the opportunity to see, why don't we like those parts? What do we get away with in life when we don't have to take ownership for certain behaviors or certain worldviews? Because there's a payoff to shutting down your heart. There's a payoff to inhabiting a victim mindset. Oh, yeah. There's a payoff to being profoundly stubborn. There's a payoff to the immovable facade of stone-like strength. Yep. humans are very, very smart.
Yes, they are.
We like do these things for reasons.
Yeah.
And that I am ultimately grateful for the opportunity to have looked at all these these compensating architectures I made in my inner being, and I am not done. I am profoundly in process. I am incredibly human along with you. I look at I get humbled so much, and I'm grateful for it, and I love myself along the way, and sometimes just fucking eat it on my face, and then cry about it, and get up and keep going. But it's the honest engagement of those parts rather than the mere, like, I just want to get through this. Because when I just want to get through this, we're still really in a rejection posture. And alchemy is a transmutation of a base substance into an exalted substance. And rejection creates a stasis of state. So it's like, oh, I'm experiencing grief. The grief valve is on. Okay, I'm in pain. Oh, God, maybe it's done. Maybe I'm not going to feel it as long. And then, like, it's off, and then it's like, oh, God, thank you. Like, I'm done with that. Now I get to have a happy life.
Right.
Like, if that's how we're coming out on the other side, instead of, God, I'm so thankful for rain. Right. I'm so thankful for being alive. I'm so, wow, I used to be so impatient, and I used to move so quickly, and I used to consume experiences and people and moments and places like this voracious, hungry ghost because I didn't want to be with this other part of myself. Like, if we don't get that, and also if we become enamored with the grief process, like I used to I really deeply accessed spirit and connection to spirit through my dad's death, and like after a couple years I saw this way that I was relating to my grief as a doorway to get to this different type of consciousness. And that started to dry up, and I was like, oh, that's not what this is for.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so I think those are it's like what we're asking from our grief or what we're not asking from it. And if we use it to get towards greater understanding and a larger perspective of a widening of the aperture and more acceptance of self and other and life, and more value for our wholeness, then we have just gone through the act of filling the cracks with gold instead, and making like a bigger piece of art instead of just like, oh, I got some glue and I just like, no more crack.
Yeah. Right. Just put it together.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. And I'm excited about this because when I have these moments when I'm crying and I am very curious to hear your experience of this. Sensation is sensation. And when sensation gets loud and intense, it's like, where do we get the valence that it's pleasureful versus painful? And really, what is the difference between like grief and ecstasy? Because I have these moments where I'll start grieving, in my my plains, North American plains thunderstorms that I can see rolling towards me for miles. Right. And then it's just like, doo, doo. And like the thunder beings arrive and the waters open up. And I start not only feeling all the threads of grieving for my ancestors and for the way we're eating and that which has been eroded, and also simultaneously being madly in love with life and the creation and dewdrops and jazz and, and like chai. It just all starts kind of mixing together into a way that it's less two sides of a coin. And I experience it more as like this woven fabric.
Yep.
Because I'm not, like, they definitely are different states in certain regards, but also when we do that forcing apart.
Yep.
And the like rejecting, we exaggerate the illusion of disconnection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And I would say that it's, so a couple things come to mind when you're saying that. So, it is a continuum, right? Like ecstasy and like grief, you were saying, right?
Yeah.
Those two things. Yeah. When I think about this kind of stuff, I always try to think that, pleasure, pain, right? Grief, ecstasy, they are a continuum, but it's more like a color scale, right?
Totally. The gradient.
Yeah. The gradient, they just shade, and it's somewhere along the way. Yes, it's different if you look over at that one side of it, but if you look back over the other side, it's different, but you realize that it's a slow fade, right? As you go through that. Chinese medicine says the same thing. This is part of what I love about their threads, because yes, it can be, people are like, oh, that's just poetic philosophy. And it's like, yeah, yes, it is. And yes. And if you actually consider what's being said here, it's fully functional. And it's a testament to this dynamic. I mean, if we look at the fire water axis, right, in Chinese medicine. So for people who don't know, Chinese medicine has this very real axis. They talk about fire and water, which means the energy of the heart up above and the water in the kidneys below. This water and fire are two things, right? Two energies that are separate, two oppositional elements, one that technically extinguishes the other. They're fully dependent upon one another for all, like, it's a huge axis in the body for physiological connection. Which means the water, right? The, and technically in Chinese medicine, it's fear and joy, right? That's like, those are like the two, happiness and fear, right? Total terror.
Well, what if you do it as like fear and anxiety,
right?
And joy, because you just did
totally
acquired nature, original nature.
Right, of course. Right, we could spit out, but yeah, in the broad sense, right? This water energy, it's like below, is supposed to, the heat from the heart, right? The emotion, the joy of life, the love of life, that heat is supposed to like push down slowly. It disperses out, but it should go down and steam the water below, which means that as that steams, that water that can be fearful and can be all these things starts to mist up, and it cools that fire too, right? So you've got this interplay where, and what these mechanisms point to are saying, okay, yes, you have fire above and water below. They need each other. And yes, one can put one out, but in the end, like, they harmonize, they balance. And I think that's the same mechanism when we look at this kind of stuff. There has to be this understanding that, the grief or the pain or the things that we go through are ultimately harmonizing something else, even if you don't understand it, right? Because it's different. I think it's different for everybody. It's not just always out of the textbook, in Chinese medicine. It's like, they can have one emotion happening here that should, by the book, should have an effect somewhere else, and it doesn't. It has something else. For me, that connection that you talked about, right? The grief and the sex piece, that floored me. I mean, that to this day, I thought, and it's been a mechanism that's been true in my life. If my sex drive goes down, or I'm not as interested, or I'm not enjoying it as much, I know definitively, I'm like, oh, I haven't cried. There's some shit in my life I haven't really probably dealt with. And if I allow myself, and typically I do like to do it alone. It's not because if I see, if my wife sees me cry that like she thinks less of me. If anything, she would like to see me cry more. But for me, I'm like, I like to go be alone, go do my thing, and just not have any eyes on me, not be observed. And then once I get it out, usually things are right back online. And it's true with other emotions too. There's other things that kind of have an oppositional one, but that one was definitive and it was clear. Yeah. And that's the harmonizing, right? Is that you get to, the grief. I mean, I think the grief is the destruction, right? Because typically a lot of grief it's a mini death or it's a real death. You lose someone and it's the extinguishing of life in some way. Something goes away. Like I said, even if it's metaphoric, but if it goes away, once it goes away, there is this counterbalance of, well, the opposite of that is creation of life, which, and at the epicenter of sex, that's a real mechanism, that's how people are made. Right. So I think that those pieces just always kind of run through my my psyche when
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this stuff. That gradation, right?
Yeah.
It's a slow tilt through it, but
Yeah.
it's just not looked at that like that. Oftentimes
Totally.
people are just like, well, it's like you said, that's sadness, that's grief, that's weakness. And, and this is the fucked up part, Larissa, that I see sometimes. And I feel for guys, because I'm like, yes, it's like, I think guys we have to come to grips that strong men cry, and that it's actually incredibly healthy for men to like process their stuff. And then I've seen, with the movement of trying to, I guess, redefine masculinity in a way, men sometimes are shamed for not crying. Like, well, you're just a alpha male sticking to the, to this old patriarchal system, and you're just a garbage piece of shit, aggressive alpha fuckstick, And I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, okay, if this is true, that men like don't know as well how to cry, do you think shaming them into saying that they're bad for not crying? And that's where I've seen men who are like sensitive guys who actually would like, I kind of would like to explore this crying thing, but I just feel like I'm being shamed for it.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, all this stuff is an evolution, right? I mean, it's like learning curves
Totally.
for everybody.
That's right.
But in the end,
I want to jump in there because
of course.
I totally want to clarify that we all grieve differently.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, in many moments, I have the same impulse as you, that I enjoy grieving alone. Like, I particularly like grieving on the earth. There's like a unique experience of going and finding like big patch of like wild grass, matting it down and sobbing into the earth, which is what I did after my dad died, and what I've done many times since. And it's a place where I feel really held and really safe and free to express. And one of my growth pieces has been opening up more and more to let other people be witness to my crying.
Yep.
And realizing how much gift that is to them.
Yep.
And how much every time, I had my own stigma overcoming, that when I had my near fatal accident and I was, bedridden and then disabled for a really long time, I mean, I definitely lost friends. I had friends who just didn't want, like, could not be with me in that state. Same thing with my dad's death, because when we don't know how to deal with different aspects of the human experience, which we either learn or don't learn from our cultural, familial, organizational settings, then that, like, oh God, I don't want to touch this.
Right.
Aspect can come in, which then the transference of that like reaction can be like, oh, I'm like a shameful piece of garbage.
Yeah, totally.
So like, I'm gonna go be alone.
Right.
And that recognize it. And I also really learned through my dad's death, my mom and my brother and I all grieved very differently. And it's really important to let everyone have their own experience of grief. And that's another thing I often say in grief rituals is we are here to witness each other's expression and the range of expressions that will be in this room, whether that is sitting quietly the whole time, whether that is speaking, whether that is sobbing uncontrollably, whether that's getting really angry, whether it's laughing.
Yep.
Our grief can move in different ways.
Yep.
And that we need to feel safe to be who we are, have the experience we have, not be told it needs to look another way.
Yep.
And that's one of the benefits in the community practice is like, oh, it's not only am I going to allow the range of human forms of pain or suffering, I'm also going to allow the range of human expression. I'm also going to allow everyone to be on their own personal developmental process wherever they are.
Right.
And that, in so many ways, that is really what's being asked of us, I think, in society.
Yeah.
Is to stop telling each other like, oh, you should be here and you should be doing that. And it's like, oh, well, we know where shaming gets us.
No kidding, because I mean I mean, God, you could apply that little dynamic over to politics, over to I mean, interpersonal relationships, friendships, business dealings. That stuff happens everywhere, right? You should be this way. This is the right way. And if you're not seeing it this way, understanding it this way, you're garbage.
Right.
It's
and
like,
that's actually why, that's one of the reasons I chose my business name, which is Wayfinding.
Yeah, it's a great
rather
name.
And I don't self-describe like externally as a wayfinder.
Yeah.
Because I don't have capital T, capital W, the way.
Right.
Like, I don't believe that that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a way. I think you are the authority of how to best live and embody your highest being, your fullest self.
Right.
Are there principles that can support aliveness? For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do I know what that's supposed to look like in form?
Nope.
That's the life journey.
Right.
That's the life journey.
Well, that's the tapestry that makes it interesting, is you get to do it. I
Totally.
mean, I've had various teachers tell me this in various different ways, but they're, the long and the short of it is how you see it matters. And you finding your way within this spectrum, as long as it's not, overtly hurting people, is really, that's like a key point. But it's finding your way is the way. That's, that's the piece that's always, it's kind of that very Zen, straight but not straight. The way is your way, but it's also the way. It's like, oh God, thank you for being clear, making this so much easier for all of us. Well, there was a piece I wanted to touch on with what you were saying too, and this was.
Can I take a brief pause and have you speak to the group?
Yes, I will riff for a minute. You
awesome.
go take care of your business. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll be here for sure.
I will be back momentarily.
Yeah. Take your time. No rush.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Well, you guys, so obviously there's a lot here in talking with Larissa, and I think the thing she's brought, that she's got running through my head, that I've thought about quite a bit, is that people, I don't know, men and women both have their issues with grief. I've known women just as much as I've known men who don't want to grieve, who don't want to process their stuff. So I don't want to just put it on men, and that's not what Larissa's saying either. But I think we have to get to a point where we understand that what she said about what I really liked, what she said, is that everyone does it a little differently. And this is true. Sometimes people will purge emotion, and grief will come out in different ways. And that's the beautiful piece, is that it doesn't have to look a specific way, because I think that's where a lot of guys get hung up, is that they don't want to cry. And maybe that's not what is necessarily or technically is good for them. And that's a legitimate piece to consider, because I think a lot of times there's a knee-jerk reaction that if you're not crying, you're missing out. And I would say on some level that's probably true. We all need to cry. There are certain times. There's a time under the stars when we all need to cry for something. But crying is also not the end all and be all, or everything that needs to be covered. So interesting points. But Larissa, are you back with us now?
I'm back.
All right,
Thank
very
you
cool.
so much.
You bet. I was just kind of talking about, to the people that were listening, just that what you said I really liked, which is basically that, grief can come out in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't have to come out a specific way, laughing, crying, because I think a lot of guys get hung up there. I know lots of men who are like, well, I don't want to cry. Maybe, and that's a huge opening of a door to hear that, it can come through in a different way. I did have a question for you. And this was, so, through a few times, I've had a few destabilizing, grief blows in my life that really have and I can think of three. One was the death of my dad. One was a breakup there's a breakup. I think the first time it happens, not everyone goes through it, but usually someone breaks our heart. We get broken up with, and that first time it happens when you're really in love with somebody just tears you apart. And it was probably one of the best things that ever could happen to me. It made me way better. But that was one. Then my daughter being in the hospital, those are like three deaths, right? That I can kind of think of that. And, in my dad's death at the time, there were friends of mine who didn't reach out and connect to me. And I would say that they were not equipped, or they didn't know what to say. And at that age, I was pissed. I was like, I don't give a shit if you're uncomfortable right now. You need to buck up and say something to me, and they never did. And as I've gotten older, I'm realizing that's not because they didn't love me. That was because they weren't equipped. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a little bit of that, like, in there where I'm like, it still bothers me. There's still a piece of like, come on, get it together. And then I think, and when I went through a breakup, that really heavy breakup in my 20s, it was like, there was an element where I called certain people and was like, look, or left voicemails. Like, I'm really struggling here, and I'm really in some dire need of just someone to listen. You don't have to say anything. Just listen to me. No callback, no response back. So I think I relate to you what you said, like when you're in the middle of the quad in Stanford and like people are just looking at you, and whether they know you or not, they're sort of turning a blind eye. How do you kind of process? Because I would say I'm in much better space with that stuff now. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some residual gunk in there for me where I'm, still kind of probably a little resentful and still a little pissed that like people didn't call me back or didn't reach out to me in those times. How do you process that stuff? Yeah.
This is like one piece I want to touch on in like the territory of coming up with like, how do we care for ourselves and each other in like the really big grief phases?
Yep.
Because it's one thing to do a grief ritual, and it's another thing to be in active mourning.
Yeah.
So how I dealt with that, because I definitely had resentment. And I too came to understand, because this is one of the consequences, living in a culture that avoids death. We usually don't like raise or kill any of the plants or animals that we consume. So, which is, how many people in an active way stay connected to the life-death cycle in if you're living a more land-based life, or you're living in a more like ecologically connected culture. But we have rejection of death in all these ways as this like something that's bad.
Yeah.
That's like the bad, shameful box. And so then, as a consequence, we don't know how to show up relationally.
Yep.
When someone else is experiencing grief or sadness or mourning or trauma. And this is one of our greatest opportunities right now, because we have an incredible upwelling and transparency in our society about different species of trauma. And I say species based in that, like, there might be different origination actions, but how can we be with that? And I think the simplest advice is, what you just said is your urge for your longing of like, I kind of don't care what you say.
Yeah.
I just want you to be with me.
Yeah. That was all I wanted.
Yeah.
They could have been silent on the other end of the line and I would have been content.
And there's a way that we need to develop like relational and emotional resilience around grief in relationships. Because when we don't act because we don't want to say or do the wrong thing, then what we're risking is connection. And if we're trying to optimize for not making mistakes, like good luck being in relationship.
Right.
Like that is just
Yeah.
a total effing nightmare.
Yeah.
And instead, what we need to do is recognize, oh, I am going to say something that's going to disappoint you or piss you off or rub you the wrong way. And so then to orient towards action, attunement, and repair, because we will disappoint each other. I will say the wrong thing. I remember a very well-intentioned friend who my near fatal accident came after an annual ceremony that I do in the winter. And she was like, "Oh, what was your intention in that ceremony?" Kind of implying like, did you ask for this or did you create this? And like my fiery internal slayer came out and was like, "Not now."
Yeah.
And that like things can be worked through.
Yeah.
But you're not going to build the muscle if you don't go to the gym.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not going to build the muscle in experiencing your own grief if you don't go to the gym. You're not going to build your muscle in being with other people's grief if you don't go to the gym.
Yep.
And whether they're a friend of yours or a family member of yours or a colleague of yours, you just have to find the relationships and start and try and say, and even if it's, how would you most like to be supported, rather than me assuming what you need?
Right.
How would you most like to be supported? And then for you to ask, and if I can't give you what you need, I have to be responsible for holding my own boundary.
Yep.
Or if for whatever reason I don't want to, and I can suggest alternatives. And some common things, there's like there are general things. If in the case of the death of a loved one, and if someone is in deep active mourning, here are some things that are helpful. Cook food. Yeah. Do laundry. Mm-hmm. Do someone's dishes.
Right.
Because when you're in more active mourning, you don't give a shit. Oftentimes can be a common pattern. You don't give a shit about the mundane.
Nope.
Meaning bleeds away. And there's just like a gaping abyss that can be there. Oftentimes. And
very true.
And to honor and to not expect the person to say or act a certain way. Maybe they want to have a break from being in that emotion all the time. Yeah. Maybe they really need to talk about that. Because again, there's the permission for the dynamism of experience. Right. Instead of, I'm going to project onto you what grief looks like, what you need, how you should be doing it, and what I can and can't give you. But instead, if we say, I'm here, or even if we say, I love you, and I hear that need right now, and I can't fully show up in this way, and I'm sorry if that disappoints you. That's so a hard thing to say.
It is.
But to be like, I'm having my own, I feel overwhelmed and challenged in all these different ways in my life, and I actually don't feel like I have the energetic capacity to show up with the amount of presence and spaciousness that I truly want to give you. And so I'm going to have to say no in this moment. Yeah. Can we have the bravery to say those things? And also, oftentimes people are just like, oh, but what were those words? And can I write those words down?
What exactly do I say? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the script? Right.
But it's more communicating, I love you and I care for you. Here's what I'm able to give, and here's how I'm tending our relationship through this. And that it's a conversation instead of I'm experiencing grief, you need to take care of me this way, or you're experiencing grief, I'm gonna respond to you this way. It's no, relationship, as it turns out, is a dynamic, ever unfolding conversation.
Oh my
Pay attention.
God,
participant.
So painfully true, right, on so many levels.
Yeah.
Well, and I can reflect just some of the couple of things you said, the mundane. My dad died at 19 and I was 19,
Yeah.
I was 19 at the time, freshman year in college, and school's important, and at the same time I
Yeah.
was like, don't really give a shit,
Yeah.
like at all.
Yeah.
I was like, the last thing on my list of shit right now is if I flunk a class, I could give a rat's ass. And it was so liberating to, I mean, it was by design. There was not much I could do about it, but to not care, I thought, in the big scheme of life, this doesn't matter. It just doesn't. So, I've never thrived in academia. I'm way more artistic and intuitive, and like structured academia is very difficult for me, truth be told. Even though I was in school from 5 to 32, I don't know what I was thinking, but like it's difficult for me, And I remember getting to college and was like, yep, it's just not. And it kind of left a mark too. I think like I always had a little bit of struggle with like structured academia, authority and whatnot, but it even got even more ingrained given that timing, just like when that metronome hit in my life. And then the other piece that, I didn't care, and I was focused on other things. I was focused on me, basically, what I was going through and what I was doing. And then the other piece, you were saying, if you don't go to the gym, right, you don't go to the grief gym, you don't work that muscle and learn how to relate to people, there's a sacrifice in connection, right? Like the connection, it made me think about this. The people that showed up for me in those times that did show up for one, my friendships now, fast forwarding this many years later, are the people that have tremendous weight in my life. And sometimes it was new terrain for them. Sometimes it wasn't. I just kind of knew. I was like, that person's always going to be there for me. But the people that, when my dad died, the people that stepped in and were willing to talk to me and create space, even if they didn't do it well, I've gotten closer with them. And the people that didn't show up, those relationships have faded some. They've like, and it's not like you're wrong and you're bad for not showing up for me, but it's just interesting to note how things unfold. That just the observation of what is. The people that didn't show up, it's like the integrity of the connection started to dissolve. I thought, if you can't be here with me right now when I really do just need you to listen, you don't have to say anything, but just be in the same space, even from a distance over the phone. If you can't do that for me, I'm not sure this is going to we're not going to evolve together, because there's literally no connection. There's nothing being had. And that's been true, And then with the breakup, same thing. The people that showed up, that were willing to process with me, I mean, God, they become some of my best friends. And I met them at 27. That's like a little bit later, this isn't like childhood friends. This is like me kind of as an adult man finding like these amazing friendships for people that were like, yeah, I'll ride the wave with you, even if it's not pretty. And even if it's not, even if it's really ugly, I'll bear the tides with you. And I'm just amazed to see the people that are willing to be emotionally vulnerable, essentially. My quality of friendships are way stronger with those people. If that emotional vulnerability about the hard knocks of life can't be there, it's very hard for me to link up with somebody. Hard for me to get there, because for me, I want the superficial, idiotic dick and fart jokes with my friends. Absolutely. It's so important. I gotta have those. And I'm and we also need to go in the bowels of hell. From when, when I'm struggling and you're struggling, we need to go to those places too, because I can't enjoy those superficial moments if I'm not able to have the deep, gnarly places too. There's this, it goes back to that gradation thing, right? It's a spectrum of we need these things, but it's such a fascinating topic. It's such a cool, there's so much here to go through. Well, Larissa, if we were to leave our people here with kind of parting thoughts, parting ideas, as we close out, what would you say? Someone's coming into this and they're like, okay, I've listened to this whole podcast and there's a lot of crazy directions it's gone about grief and, emotions and why it's relevant for our culture, how you're doing it in business, which is amazing. If people were, let's just say for the emotionally non-intelligent, and they're like, okay, I know I need to incorporate this into my life on some level, and they have the drive, but they're just clueless. What would you say is the baseline place that the regular average person should start in terms of, getting these ideas moving in their life in real time that's applicable and could help them?
Yeah. a couple of questions that I would offer for consideration on that path are, what has been my relationship to feeling discomfort, to feeling sadness to date? What do I believe about myself and how I'm supposed to relate to these feelings? What are the main experiences in my life that have asked me to look or asked me to encounter these feelings, and how have I dealt with them? In what ways did those choices serve, and in what ways did those choices potentially obstruct my fullness of being?
Good questions.
What do I most long for in the full expression of my being? And how might feeling more uncomfortable aspects of myself help me get there? Yeah. Because...
big questions.
Yeah, because even it's an interesting thing that those questions can take us into reflection, but ultimately they're stepping stones to get us into the realm of feeling. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, how can these feelings be teachers for me?
Yeah.
How can these feelings be teachers for me? And another one, going back to that, like, what do I believe about myself, or what are the stories I tell about these feelings? To look at what's false about those stories. Because we can often have false beliefs preventing us from feeling. So we can center more of our energy circulation up in the mental realm as a defense mechanism to feeling down into our somatic experience and our emotional experience. And maybe even like the very, 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 very first question is, what happens in my body when I think about grief? As a first handhold.
That's a good question, because I think what makes it embodied, it makes it physical, where it's no longer, because I think that's a big piece, right? Emotions. I've had this thread with many people. Emotions are these immaterial things that, where are they? Like, where the fuck is an emotion? Like, where is it? Right. But when you start to like locate like a feeling in the body, it's like, okay, this thing that has no material at least has a location. It's a place to start in our physical form. Mm-hmm. And that's really good. That last little bit you said, though, the defense mechanism, right? The overactive mind that will defend against, what I call the feeling heart. I mean, I've seen that so many times, right? People that are just perpetually, never-endingly sarcastic and joking and, stuck in every external world event, but they can't for a second, just an emotional, like crippled almost emotionally, where they can't even go down for a second and touch something that makes them feel, sad or, or grief or any of those things. It's great. Those are great questions.
I'm going to give just a couple more in that very first somatic question, because it is very simple, and it's also to not, yay if you're excited about asking these questions, because we all got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's very true.
As much as I felt as a child, I realized all these ways that I had hardened prior to my dad dying. Mm-hmm. And it was just like this like massive explosion and opening of the gates, and I didn't know. So in terms of opening up, slowly opening up, and if you don't have a precipitating event taking you there, where do I feel it in my body? How does it make me feel? What does it feel like? And to ask yourself to be very specific in describing that feeling. If it's If it's like, it feels bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is a subjective descriptor.
Yeah.
To try to get towards, I feel it in my upper chest. So locate it physically in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then quality. It feels like tightness. It feels like clenching. It feels like heavy, wet snow. It feels like the bottom of a swamp. The more specific we can get in describing it, the more we're letting the feeling like breathe to life.
Yeah.
And after you get through being very, very specific, and it might have a color, it might be like, oh, it feels like ripped cloth.
Yeah.
You know? Once we get to that level of description, to then, as you tune into the feeling, to ask, like, what is this? What can I learn from this feeling?
Right.
You know? And what is, if we're to personify it, like, what does it want me to know?
Right. If it were a personality, what does it have to say?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's information. And information wants to transmit into our awareness, but when we're not activated in our sensing muscle, then the information gets locked. And all that's required to unlock information is listening.
Yep. So true.
Listening and curiosity. So
yes.
It's a pretty simple key.
Yeah. Right. A winning formula of sorts. Yeah. Well, Larissa, if people want to find you, on social media, or you have any kind of like website or things that we can like refer people to, that if they want to kind of track you and see what you're doing, where should they go?
If you want to learn more about my business, you can go to www.wayfinding, wayfinding.io. I also share thoughts occasionally, along with photos, on Instagram under the handle LB Conte. And those are two great initial places. And I also publish articles on Medium. If you look up Larissa Conte, last name spelled Conte.
Beautiful. Well, Larissa, thank you for all of the work you're doing. For one, the culture needs it. So thank you for that, and thank you for just sharing, the knowledge and opening up this stuff and these doorways. I think because a lot of people, we need it, and we're not particularly good at it all the time. So it's relevant stuff to know. So thank you.
Yeah. Can I add 2 resources and
Sure.
also 2 honorings of teachers? So
of course.
A lot of my experience in learning about grief was opened up through my own life. But then as I learned both through reading and through experiential learning, 2 very valuable sources of wisdom around grief helped guide me. One was a teacher by the name of Sobonfu Some. That's Sobonfu Some. She has incredible writing and experiences on grief. And I am so grateful for all I learned from her about grief rituals and the importance of grief in the health of a community. Cool. Similarly, another great teacher and writer on grief is Martine Prechtel, has a book entitled The Smell of Rain on Dust.
Ooh, great name.
Oh, it's so, and he writes about the relationship between grief and praise, how they're inseparable, necessary elements for our aliveness.
How do you spell the last name?
Martine's full name is spelled Martin, last name Prechdtel.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Those sound like great books.
Yeah, both very, very wise individuals. I'm so grateful for them passing on their cultural experiences and understanding from the Dogra people of Burkina Faso and the Tsutujil Mayan people, because we have the opportunity to engage in culture repair and weave habits that once existed that haven't existed for a little bit.
They fall by the wayside, that's for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gray. It's been a joy talking to you.
Yes, definitely.
I'm so grateful for the conversations you're hosting and the work you're doing in your life, and for all of the stories you shared about your relationship with grief. Yeah. Because every time anyone hears about the possibility of navigating grief and the really just the like tremendous gifts that come from it,
yep,
it shows possibility that is true for them too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Larissa. We'll probably have you back on at some point. So thanks for being here, though.
All right. You just let me know.
Okay.
Have a good day.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.